The 9/11 Commission basically said that 9/11 was a result of a failure of imagination. And we can imagine many threats out there. When we have failed programs and we see taxpayer dollars wasted, that's not only not only a management issue. It is an issue that puts the American people more at risk. It's an issue that prohibits the department from doing its core mission, and that is protecting the homeland. It's not hard to imagine a nuclear threat. When we look at the situation in Iran with Israel, Iran getting closer to having a nuclear capability, when we see Iran's relationship with Venezuela and Cuba, Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere, Hezbollah in Mexico, Hezbollah in the United States. And yet we had a program, a nuclear detection program, the ASP, that totally failed. $230 million of taxpayer dollars wasted. We had a program, SBInet, a border security program, $1 billion, nearly $1 billion wasted. In the private sector, if that occurred, people would be held accountable. In the private sector, a business would be accountable to their shareholders. They'd be accountable to the federal regulators. They'd be accountable to the Justice Department. And yet, here are just two examples of tremendous failures that, in my judgment, put the American people more at risk to a nuclear attack across our southwest border. And yet no one was held accountable. There was no accountability. It's not just about management. It's about American lives at stake. And so that's how I see this issue. It's an issue of integration. You have 22 different departments merged into one giant agency. And Mr. Boris, I know you have a great challenge on your hands. And you inherited a lot of this. And it's very difficult to merge 22 agencies. But when they're stovepiped with acquisition and procurement, and they're not integrated, we see these failures. Again, radiation detection, ASP, $230 million of the taxpayer money. SBInet, $1 billion. And again, it's not some glazed over management issue. This puts American lives at stake to a nuclear threat that exists, that is real. Not only the nuclear threat, but the border, which, coming from the state of Texas, I view as a tremendous threat to our security. So with that, Mr. Boris, explain to me what happened with the ASP program. What happened, and was anybody held accountable within the department?
Certainly both the SBI program and the ASP, as well as other programs, were highly informative. Certainly to me, when I came in, SBInet was initiated in 2006, ASP shortly thereafter, and as we now know, the Secretary called a halt to the SBI program to take a look at the factors that went into the cost overruns and the lack of good requirements. Similarly with ASP, in April of 2011, we had a acquisition review board meeting where we reviewed the progress and the lack of success with ASP, and we directed that that program be ended, the contract not be extended. What I'm saying to you, Mr. Chairman, is that those programs in the past suffered from the lack of oversight. There was no mechanism to review, back in 2006, 2007, departmentally programs. What we have put in place, which I've described and my colleagues have acknowledged exists, is now we have a robust acquisition review process. We are using information gathering tools like the DST to be able to now monitor much more closely the project process and the progress of programs. But it's not just catching programs when they fail. Because we have to manage these investments, it's very important that we maintain the sustainability of a program. So we have to increase its probability of success while reducing its risk. So now we have a mechanism, and we have documented over the last 2 years, over 70 instances where we have called programs before the department where they're subject to a comprehensive review, and as a result of those reviews, they've been giving adjustments, modifications. In some programs like ASP, they've been told to cease. They've been told to perform other functions to modify their process to improve the success of those programs. So, Mr. Chairman, I will say to you that we are far from perfect, but we are much better stewards of the investment dollars today than we were back in 2006, 2007.
Well, I certainly hope so. Was anybody held accountable for these failures?
Both of those programs were initiated certainly before my time at the department, so I'm not aware or cognizant of any action that was taken prior to my arrival in 2000.
I just think too often, I was in the Justice Department for a decade, but, I think too often the federal government, when failures like this are made, nobody's held accountable. And, if this is in the private sector again, a private company, corporation, heads would have rolled over this thing. And yet I don't see any accountability here. I mean, I applaud your efforts to transform the agency. You have a great task in front of you, but it's this accountability issue that seems to be lacking in my judgment. Finally, and I have to move on very quickly, but Mr. Maurer or Mr. Edwards, do you have any thoughts on this issue in terms of what needs to be done to prevent these failures from occurring again?
I think the first thing the department needs to do is execute the plans that it's already put in place. That's traditionally been a challenge DHS has faced from the time it was stood up. They've had plans to address IT and human capital and acquisition from the time it was created in 2003. They haven't always executed on those plans, so I think that's sort of the first thing going forward. And I think the second thing going forward is accountability. As you correctly point out, Mr. Chairman, it's important to have accountability and oversight of these ongoing efforts. And we've been working very closely with DHS in this regard, and we'll continue to do so.
Yeah. And just very briefly, Mr. Edwards.
The department has matured. They initially were focusing on keeping the public safe. Most of the resources were dedicated to that. Now they are focusing on improving management controls, standardizing policies, procedures, and developing systems to integrate. I think this is a huge monumental task, and the department is making progress and moving in the right direction.
Just let me close by saying I think Department of Defense had a lot of growing pains, and the Goldwater-Nichols plan I think we should be looking at. And finally, I come from Austin where there's a lot of technology. I really think technology could be your best friend in terms of integration, and I do applaud your efforts to bring in the cloud, where you have the 22 different agencies integrated through technology, but with use of the cloud. I think that could really move the department forward in the right direction.